Now it's my pleasure to introduce Andrew Acriman, head of Reach Labs at Second Century Ventures. Andrew is a serial entrepreneur turned early-stage investor and innovation expert with over 2 decades of experience and more than 70 startup investments under his belt. Currently serves as strategic advisor and head of Reach Labs at Second Century Ventures, where he helps shape the future of prop tech innovation. In addition, Andrew advises corporate clients on innovation strategy and teaches entrepreneurship as an adjunct professor. Previously, Andrew was managing director at Dream It Ventures, where he launched and built both edtech and urban tech, prop tech and construction verticals, supporting hundreds of startups along the way. He's a prolific writer with over 60 articles published in major outlets, including Fortune, Forbes, Siri Tech, Architect Magazine, and EdSurge. And he is the author of The Entrepreneur's Odyssey, a textbook cleverly disguised as a novel guiding aspiring founders through the startup journey. Please join me in welcoming Andrew Acriman as he shares his insights on building successful startup ecosystems. Andrew?
Wow, thanks for making me sound really interesting. But when you said like that makes 2 of us who are new, I guess that makes 3 of us. I wanted to thank Brian Modell for introducing me to Shelby, but like this is the one time he doesn't come. So okay, we'll just all tease him about that. Okay, so I want to talk to you about what it takes to build a successful and thriving startup ecosystem. But I don't want to talk to you about it. I want to talk with you about it. So this is meant to be interactive. We're a small enough group that, just raise your hand and jump in if you have something to add. I will pause and I'm going to ask you questions along the way. Don't worry, I'm not keeping score. I'm not quizzing, though I did seed the audience with one or two ringers who I hope will jump in when I ask them to. And this is also not something that there's any one right answer to. So this is going to be a little bit of exploring the topic together. Is that good? Can somebody raise their hand and back if you can hear me? Awesome, perfect. Okay, so we talked a little about where I'm coming from. I'm not going to repeat this. I'm happy to tell you more about the book later if you want. I'm just going to skip to this slide, which explains where I'm coming from on the topic of startup ecosystems. So my first startup was founded in 2000. Back then, New York City was actually kind of a distant third when it came to startup ecosystems after Silicon Valley and Boston. So I've seen New York overtake Boston and get within a stone's throw of Silicon Valley, and I lived through how they did that. Also, I've been recruiting startups internationally for many years, so I've had the chance to go out to other ecosystems, even outside of the US, to get a sense of what they're doing as well. When I launched the urban tech vertical for Dream It, we got connected with a gentleman by the name of Jeff Vinnick down in Tampa. Some of you may know the name. He used to run Magellan, relatively big private, I was going to say hedge fund, but it's not. It's mutual fund. And now he owns the Tampa Bay Lightning. So for those of you who are hockey fans or married to Canadians, you know the name Jeff Vinnick. My wife's from Toronto, otherwise known as North New York. So anyways, I was down there when that startup ecosystem started blossoming, and I worked with them quite a bit, and we're going to pull on some of those lessons as well. And in addition to all that in my work for Second Century Ventures, what I do is I launch what are called Reach Labs, which are frameworks actually for local realtor or other real estate organizations to help source innovative startups for their members. So it's a different way of kind of bringing innovative startups and nurturing them within a community. So that's where I come from. Hopefully that brings me insights that are at least reasonably interesting for this. The number one insight for startup ecosystems is that what worked yesterday doesn't work today. All right? And I'm going to go through the first, second, and third generation of startup ecosystems. I'll explain why they worked when they did and why they won't work today. So far, so good? We're happy? Okay, wow, after lunch sucks. Okay, go on. So the first generation of startup ecosystems, and I'm going to wander around a little bit, I'll at least get my energy going. The first generation of startup ecosystems were emergent. They weren't planned. They were systems where all the ingredients came together and then something happened and they took an early lead. So when you think about it, what are the ingredients for a startup ecosystem? Well, you want talent, which is usually highly correlated to having good universities. A lot of cities have that. You want capital. There's at least a dozen, if not 24 cities where there's a lot of capital available. And then you want, companies, customers for the startups. Well, there's lots of places for that, especially in the first generation where a lot of the big early names were consumer focused and could be really based anywhere. So why is it that Silicon Valley took a lead over New York and over every other city in the country? The truth is, it's a little bit of luck. We had a couple of early successes. Those early founders and early employees then had a lot of money and experience, and they started working with other founders and other, seeding other companies and investing, and there became kind of a virtuous cycle, almost like a dandelion when you blow it, and it kind of seeds other startups. And then you get to the point where it's like, well, if that's where all the investors are, then I'm going to go move there because I have a startup, I want to find investors. And if you're an investor, like, well, I'm going to go where all the startups are. So a virtuous cycle starts to take hold, and they kind of pulled ahead. I don't think there's anything in particular that Silicon Valley did to do it. It just kind of happened. They got lucky. And in fact, if you were a betting person in, like, say, 1960, looking down, who would have bet on Silicon Valley over, say, New York? No one. So this is what happens in the first generation. It wasn't planned. It was emergent. And there's really nothing we can do to emulate that because that time has passed. Which brings us to the second generation of startup ecosystems. This is a fast follow model. Like, I want to be the Silicon Valley of the Midwest or of Texas, or insert your region there. Now, this was intentional. Chicago looks at Silicon Valley and says, I want to do that. Not everyone's going to move to Silicon Valley, but if you're a talented startup in Madison, Wisconsin, you might move to Chicago, right? So it becomes a regional strategy, and it works, right? So what they did there, very intentionally, was they built the building blocks. They built co-working spaces, they incentivized investors to come, and they brought that together, and it was just enough where you had good startups who didn't want to relocate to New York or to Silicon Valley say, I'm going to go to Chicago because I can make a great business there. And that works, and it worked well, right up until you get to the point where you run out of regions, right? You don't need the Silicon Valley of the Upper West Side of Manhattan. Like, that region is just too small. So most of those niches are already taken. So it was a good strategy, doesn't work anymore. Third generation startup ecosystems. This is the generation we're in now. It's a little bit messy, but the theme I'm seeing is it's based around a city's unique advantages, often an industry, right? So let's say you wanted to build a hospitality startup. What would be the city? Let's just close your eyes. What city would you want to be in? Not a hypothetical question. Pick a city. Vegas, that's a good example. What other cities could possibly be a hospitality focus? Miami, great. See how those jumped right up to mind? So if you're a startup and you want to do hospitality, and there was, Vegas or Miami trying to say, hey, we're going to be the Silicon Valley for hospitality startups, that would make sense. Now, there's things you have to do to support it, and we're going to spend a lot of time talking about it. But that's what I'm talking about using your city or your region's unique advantages to carve out a space for yourself. Throw another one out here. Let's say I wanted to do something in the Maritimes. I want to do something with shipping. Where? Okay, interesting. I usually think submarines, so I think military, but maybe that makes sense. What else? Long Beach, California, you mean? Good. Okay, that's good too. Oh, all good. Think international. Hamburg, Rotterdam. Okay, I got one more no one's got yet. Singapore, also good. I got a better one. Dubai, maybe. Athens, Hong Kong. Okay, you're all going to say like, oh, you ready? Panama. Right? But think about it, right? If you've ever been down there in Panama City, thank you for the Oz, I appreciate that. Right? There are lines and lines of container ships waiting to go through that canal. And there's a whole ecosystem of companies that support that trade right there. Single largest concentration. If I spoke Spanish, I'd be down there pitching this right now. But my Spanglish is only iffy. Okay, so let's go a little bit further in here. Let's talk about the building blocks of a startup ecosystem. I alluded to this a little earlier. There are 4 pieces, and since I'm an ex-consultant, they all start with the same letter, right? There's capital, basically investment. There's customers, right? Large corporations usually. Coaching, which is mentors, advisors. And then there's the community, which is kind of an amorphous term for everything that gets people together and makes them feel like they're not going at it alone. So who here's a startup? I want to do that. Okay. Let's go through it. If you had to rank these in order of importance, what would you put first? By the way, name too, because I'm new here.
Oh, my name's Mickey.
And startup name?
Startup is photonics.
Okay.
Based in photonic-based technologies. So, I mean, I would say community is really important. You want coaching, capital, customers. That pretty easily.
Interesting. Okay, before I weigh in on that, I had a, yeah,
Alex, again,
yeah.
like plastics, cosmetical, water. I'd have to imagine coaching first.
Really?
Yeah, stand on
Interesting.
the shoulders giant. He mentor. I think customers come next. There's get product on 5 years developed. After that, capital to support the actual production of the product and getting it around.
Got it. Who else was a founder? That's what I hand over there. Customers. Cool. Before I wait, we had one more. Can we get one more? No? There.
My name is Dave, and I agree with customer for entries, the dots are how work bigger sake full of that.
Not one of my plans, but I like that answer. Okay, so usually this is the order, right? So, we had one that was one off, but two people, it's really, oh, sorry, step back. This is the order that people who are building ecosystems often focus on. They start with the community, work their way down coaching, capital, and the customers is almost a little bit of an afterthought because it's hard. They kind of assume that that's going to happen organically. But when I ask startups, this is the order, almost always, right? Customers are always first or second, with very few exceptions. That's it. Everything else follows, right? If you got sales, you're going to get investment by and large, right? Just listen to your customers. There are people you can find for coaching. It's usually not the hardest part for a startup. They can sometimes do that on their own. And then community, again, like it's nice, but like sometimes you just, what does it do? Sometimes you just push through. So let's talk a little bit about the tools that you actually use to build these things. And we're going to go through it with 3 different personas. We're going to go through it with the persona of startup founders, actually with targets, like so who are we trying to help? Start with target, what we do to help the founders directly. Then we're going to talk a little bit about what we would do, maybe to incentivize investors or to help them come. And then we're going to talk about the customer side. And that's the side that I think is going to be a little newer to some of the people here. Okay, so the first thing, let's just get it out there, tax incentives for founders. Okay, we have 4 founders in the room. Any tax incentives help you really? No? Would you move to this region if you weren't from here for a tax incentive? Yeah, no.
That doesn't stop me from chasing.
Yeah, I can try to get, well, we'll talk about grants in a little bit. The main reason for this is the kind of tax incentives regions can give usually are way down the road, right? I mean, you didn't give me, I don't have to pay real estate taxes. Maybe if I'm building a factory, right? But this is not the kind of startup we're talking about. These things are usually so far down the road that there are a lot of other things that are more important to a startup. At the early stage, we're usually talking about. Anyone in the room here in ecosystem building, economic development, you want to push back? You want to say, maybe there's a tax incentive I don't know about? No, you were just waving. Oh, nice to meet you too. Anyone else?
No, I was, but you're not wrong.
Oh, okay, there we go. Doesn't. But people still talk about it. Name, please.
Army at a partner. Tax program that I'd say a startup in 2008. The incentives were actually to like the
To the employees or to the investors?
to the employees.
Okay, so talk to me about that, Rami.
So basically, they were getting them from you to pay taxes, payroll taxes. Now as an employer, I can offer you instead of paying you at 10 and you get to keep 8. Pay 10, you keep 9.
Interesting. Let's talk about that a little separately.
That was the difference. I'm not an expert on
Yeah.
the program, but I saw that to me that the only tax incentive is positive tax.
Okay, so let's talk about that in a little bit. The one thing where it gets a little tricky is at the state level, right? When you're building a startup ecosystem, unless you're like Rhode Island, you're building an incentive usually at a region or a city level. So you can exempt it from city's taxes, but like there's federal, there's state, depending on where you are, and then there's city.
Yeah, I'm actually in that program. There is a I think get the right program.
Okay.
But I came here, I just didn't.
Okay. So this is interesting, but the question is, does it move the needle, and can you actually control this at the ecosystem level? So I want to talk about that later, but we're going to move on. Okay. Co-working spaces. Almost every startup ecosystem is like, we're going to create a co-working space. It's nice to have. Like, as a founder, I appreciated it because I saved on rent. But it's expensive at the end of the day. It's an expensive perk to offer, and you'll have no shortage of people who will try to claim it. So how do you allocate it? All right, so unless you're thinking about this as a VC and you're assessing people to come in as a VC, then you're awarding it, it's not going to be well allocated. Now, how do you normally award, people who have run, anyone here run a co-working space? No? So how would you, what was your application process?
Mine, I tried starting it up. It wasn't super structured, a little looser, but at the end of the day, it's a lot of work. I think around here, there's enough spaces to work with. I don't think it's enough differentiator.
Let me ask you another question. Mentally look around the room at the last co-working space. How many companies in that room do you think really should have left already because they're not going to make it? And so how do you tell somebody, okay, your time here's up, it's not happening? Now you could say you get 1 year free, you can do that, but usually you end up with a lot of kind of entrepreneurs who are using it to hang out, and it's just generally not a good use of money. Okay, events. Events are actually pretty good, but they only get you so far. They're good opportunities, you meet other founders, if they're in the same space, maybe you can, maybe hopefully you're not competing, but you can compare notes. You can find out, hey, I'm struggling with X, I'm struggling with Y. It's not a bad thing to do, and it's actually a good opportunity for layering educational material on top of it, like telling people how they can raise their round, how they find investors, or how to do a good customer discovery meeting. Like, that's all great, but diminishing marginal returns. Have you ever been in a startup ecosystem where you've been like, there's so many events, I can't go to them all? Sorry, I keep picking on the same 4 founders. But that's common. It's common. You get to the point where it's like, I just can't go to them all. So how many do you have? Okay, mentorship programs. This is where it sometimes gets a little bit contentious. Mentorship is priceless, but bad mentorship can kill a company. Founders, have you had bad advice that set you back pretty far? Anyone not have bad advice that didn't send you back pretty far? Anyone have bad advice that killed the company? Yeah, it happens. So the kind of founders, the kind of mentors that make the most sense for startups are exited founders or founders that are at least 2 or 3 stages ahead of them. Like, if you're a seed stage founder, you want to have somebody who's done their B round at least, because they've been through a couple of iterations. They've gone far enough along in the process that they know what worked, didn't work, they're able to reflect on it and give you meaningful advice. Ideally, they're in a similar or same industry as you. Right? That's the perfect mentor. Most of these programs have a wall of faces. Sometimes there are vendors on that list. Often there are investors. Those are generally pretty good. But then there's also a lot of other people who are in the system who are really good at a specific topic, but not good at the rest of it. I'm going to pick on lawyers. I apologize in advance. It's not just you, but people seem to get this example. If you're a lawyer and you deal with forming corporations or contract law or startup financing, you're great for a startup to go to for those topics. You got to stop talking after that. They start asking you oh, so, I have this meeting coming up, how should I approach it? That's out of your lane, right? And it's very, very tempting because, you're smart, you're eager to help. It's very tempting to give advice, but everything in your training is the opposite of what a startup founder needs. A startup founder needs to move fast. She needs to be a little sloppy, right? She needs to know the right balance between aggression and, waiting for the right time. If you are a lawyer, especially through the first couple of years of your career, you are incentivized to be methodical. You're incentivized to think of every way something can go wrong. You're paid by the hour, so you're not incentivized to be fast. And if you do something and you miss something, right, that's it, you're out. Lawyers, have you ever gotten a bonus for getting a deal done faster? No. In fact, if you kill a deal because you've come up with all the different ways it can go wrong, your client will almost thank you. They'll be like, "God, I avoided a minefield." Right? And they kind of forget the fact that, well, that's an opportunity that probably would have succeeded and made a lot of money. And everything that you're talking about is in that, if it goes wrong, minority case, even maybe edge case. So everything in your training, and again, I'm sorry for picking on you, is counter to the way a startup needs to think. So if you want to do the startups a favor and you want to do right by them, give them the advice on what you know. And if they ask you other stuff, say, listen, I'm not the right person to do it. And by the way, I take my own advice here. I've been investing in prop tech and construction tech. If people come up to me and they ask me about other types of startups, I'm not the right person to ask. And so I also stay in lane. Okay, I apologize. I know that picking on you. We'll move on. So in addition to like staying in lane or finding the right people, the chemistry matters, right? So you can have a great founder who's done their B round or maybe had an exit in the right industry, and you introduce them to a startup founder, earlier stage, and they just don't click. Or maybe one of them's super busy. That's the problem, right? Founders are busy, right? Maybe they're raising their C round, and then they're not as available, for 6 months or whatever the case may be. So what then? Right? Do you have the depth within your network, within the region, to service the startups you want to service? Right? So if you want to do mentorship right, you got to go really deep, and it's okay to go outside of your network, right? Zoom, why not? But that's how you do mentorship right, by having the depth to be able to service your startups. Now, all of this becomes easier if you've got an industry focus, right? And that's going to be a consistent theme. We'll come back to that over and over again. And the last thing, and this happened a lot with Techstars in their early days, mentor whiplash. They would have mentor matching on the first day. You'd meet with 100 different people. You get 100 different, often conflicting pieces of advice. Right? So there is diminishing marginal returns on mentorship, even if when you do set it up properly. How are we doing here? Good? Right? I'm not coming off too negative, am I? Because I really do like this. It's just, there's a lot of minefields here. Okay. I think this is the last tool in the kit for startup founders, giving them money, out and out money. It's rare, it's often wasted, but it happens. And usually it's like matching funds or grants, right? It's like, okay, if you get this much money from, a VC that's kind of on our list, we'll match it 1-for-1. In some cases, 1-for-5. It could be structured as a loan, you pay us back, maybe you don't if it fails. Startups love it, right? Any startups turn down money in that case? No? Totally cool with it? But it's expensive, right? It's expensive, and you're asking people in the startup ecosystem to award grants when that's not really where their skills lie. Like, if they were doing that, they would be angel investors and they would be VC investors. So often what you'll end up doing is it'll be, if you've gotten VC funding, then you're eligible. And that seems to get around that and works reasonably well. Where these things sometimes fall down are twofold. One, they're not focused, right? They're not focused on the ecosystem you're trying to build based on the strength of your area, in which case that's great. You've helped one startup, but you've helped one startup. There's no kind of network effect to it. And the other one is they end up putting strings on it. The strings are usually residency requirements. There could be others, but it's usually residency requirements. It might be employment, minimum employment. And anything that you do to make a startup do something that would not be in their best interest of their business, you're actually shooting yourself in the foot a little bit. Like, I found a great startup, I'm gonna give you money, and then I'm gonna make you do stuff wrong. So that's where you get the conflict here, because you wanna bring startups into the area. That's usually the focus, and that's what you'll attach, with all good intentions. But if you haven't built the rest of the ecosystem to make it a good business decision for them to be here, you're kind of fighting against yourself on this one. Okay? Okay, so let's turn it around. Let's talk about investors. Yeah, I had to look for the right Patagonia vest for this picture. Events, right? Yeah, events are good. They're not enough, though. Right? So events are good in the way that, you can bring deals to VCs, maybe even bring a potential investors in their fund, right? Offer a VC a potential investor introduction, they'll be there. right? That's a good way to get them through the door. The investors are often exited founders themselves. They see a lot of startups, so they're actually a good opportunity to create an educational event, and it's very valuable for the startups. The question, though, is when does this catch fire, right? I have to say this is the hook, it's not the fish, right? It needs to be the match that lights the fire. Otherwise, you're just constantly lighting matches. So this is the beginning of a strategy, or at least a tactic towards a strategy. It's not enough by itself. And a lot of times it's easy to point to, like, we had all these events, that's as evidence of kind of activity in the ecosystem. But you got to remember, you're just lighting matches, right? You want to light a fire here. Okay, so one other tactic, which some people do, is office space. Chicago did this actually very well. Anyone here from Chicago? Anyone here been to Chicago? Great, I knew I'd at least get a hand on that. Ever, what Merchandise Mart is? Okay, so downtown, they took over the space. They turned it into a co-working space. In that generation, that was a second generation ecosystem play that made sense. And they offered free office space for any VCs that wanted to come down and stay there. So even if your main office was somewhere else, you could come in, you always had a room. A lot of them would just say, great, I'll sit there. VCs, they're two people, they don't take up that much space, they're one person maybe. So it was actually a fairly economic way to put startups in the room, literally, with VCs. So that was great. And it pairs well with the events. It's like you come to the event in the afternoon, spend the rest of the day, do office hours, mentoring. You see, it all kind of comes together, mentoring startups. Works pretty well. The question here is, what's next, right? You can get them to come. They come for a day. You give them free space. The last thing you want is that to be empty all the time, right? So this is part of trying to accelerate the fire, right? So get them to come for an event, give them space, encourage them to spend a little bit more time. But at the end of the day, like, the startup ecosystem has to start taking off. They have to start seeing more and more founders for them to want to spend more and more time here. Make sense? Okay, good. Okay, so let's start getting back into tax incentives, right? Here, a little more effective than for startups, right? There are tax incentives, but cities don't usually control them, right? You want to give me lower cap gains? That's great, but that's for the federal government. And so I'm not really sure what we can do at a local level for this, but tax incentives really work for investors. It does. Like, we would move. Like, I'm going to be on a train or a plane anyway, so why not be here? Let's keep going. There's another, related to this, are direct grants. Now, this has been used very effectively in some areas. You're all familiar with Israel, right? Duh, right? So there was a program called Azima back in the 90s. And it was actually a super generous, almost strings-free approach to jumpstart the VC ecosystem there. And it worked like a charm. Right? It works really well. It was a little earlier. That was like first generation in the ecosystems, but it worked really well. In New York City around 2008, there was the Partnership for New York. They have a fund called New York's NYC Seed. Owen Davis, good friend. It really helped kind of jumpstart the ecosystem at a critical time. So these things do work. Now, we're in the third generation now, so we need to be a little more focused about these efforts. I want to give a shout out to one other fund that's really interesting. Have any heard of Heartland Ventures? No? Okay, so in Indiana, they set up this fund, two individuals, Mark Harmon and, blanking on his partner's name, Max something. What they made sure they did is, and I think there was a public-private partnership in it, the LPs were all the large and mid-size companies in the state, the companies that actually employed the majority of people there. And they were all LPs in the fund, so they were literally and figuratively invested in the startups that were being brought there, and it gave them a stronger incentive to actually work with them. So the mandate of Heartland Ventures was to bring innovative startups into Indiana, not where they would go in, on their own first, so that the companies in that state would have access to innovation at the same time as their competitors elsewhere. The project in Tampa that we worked on had a similar approach. When I was first, I have a long story, but I'll make it short. When I first was approached with the opportunity, with Jeff Vinnick. I didn't know who he was. And he's like, oh, he wants to do something in Tampa. I'm like, I don't want to set up a startup. I don't want to set up an accelerator in Tampa, right? It's like, I have probably the same impression of Tampa that a lot of people in the room did. It's nicer than that, but I'm like, what's going to get a startup to go to Tampa? You're just going to get the third-rate startups that have no choice. So the guy I was talking to, he's like, Andrew, you're dumb. Like, go away, Google Jeff Vinnick, then come back. There's about 3 more zeros on his net worth than I thought. So I came back a little humbler and I said, okay, I'll listen. Turned out Vinnick wanted to bring startups to Tampa, not to live, not to relocate, but just to come on a regular basis so that the big companies like the Raymond Jameses of the world that actually employed a lot of people in Tampa would have access to, say, fintech innovation in the same pace that, say, JP Morgan did or Citibank. So it was really interesting. So we're going to come back to this theme when we talk about customers, because this is, I believe, one of the kind of thin end of the wedges that you can use to really create a startup ecosystem in this part of the cycle, if you can find an unclaimed niche to exploit. Okay, we're going to switch now to customers, right? So this is usually where startup ecosystems either don't know or don't think to focus. The number one thing is education. We think of large companies as having a lot of skills, having a lot of knowledge in-house. Working with startups is not one of them. Right? Even very large companies work with startups poorly. I've consulted for a lot of corporate venture funds. Most of them suck. Most corporate venture funds last 3 or 4 years. Their champion goes away. Their returns are horrible. The people who are any good actually want carried interest, so they leave and form a fund. Right? There's some good people still in the space, and there are ways to structure it, right? But most of them don't work. So don't assume just because it's a large or reasonably large company that they know how to work with startups. One of the common mistakes corporates make is they over-lawyer deals or they over-negotiate deals. They want to protect themselves on all the downsides. Well, guess what? The corporation is 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000 times larger than the startup. You got all the leverage that you need. Right? You don't need to over-lawyer terms with it. You can do it very quick and dirty. You're going to get what you want. Inside of corporations, though, the individuals who want to do these deals, they're worried if something goes wrong, it's their butts that are on the line. So as much as you tell them you have all the leverage you want, they're going to paper over it. Right? So you have to not only understand at the highest levels that you don't need to overcomplicate things, and you can move that fast, but you need to create the framework and the incentives for the people inside your organization to actually believe that. Right? So some of the things that you can do, first you get the top C-level support, you're very vocal about it, great. People are cynical at the middle, but you got to keep going, work your way down. Right? You have to make sure that even into the compensation, a failed pilot is not a failure. Right? You know what a failure is? A failure is keeping a pilot going because you need to make it succeed, otherwise you look bad. A win is killing a pilot in 3 months and moving on to the next startup. But how do you put that into, say, your 6-month and 1-year review? Right? If you even ask somebody, how is that pilot going? You're already on the wrong track. Because the only right answer that you're going to give your boss is, it's awesome. And then you're going to keep pouring resources into it until you claim a win or until you've been promoted and it's not your problem anymore. So subtle things like that. We have to teach corporates how to avoid these problems inside. And one of the tricks we talk about, 2 of the tricks we talk about is 1, a standard agreement. So I have startups, what they'll do is, usually they're working with, say, 1 or 2 properties for a large landlord. It goes well, they attract the attention of the higher ups, and they negotiate like a master service agreement. And the goal of the master service agreement isn't, I don't get all their buildings. It never happens. You have to kind of sell each region or each building on its own. But what it does is it creates a simple framework that any other building can sign on to. Oh, you want to do it? Great. Here's a 2-page contract. Everything else already negotiated. And that speeds things up. To the extent that you can create a standard framework or help a corporation create a standard framework for piloting, and it's blessed by the senior level. And if it goes bad, say, hey, I used the standard template. We're good. It's no black mark on on me. That can speed things up. And then also there's budget. Very often you go into a corporation, guys want to do it's hey, I'm on budget right now, come back in 6 months. There are ways around that. But these are the things we need to educate, and these are the things we want to help corporations do better. So let me ask you guys, you've worked with corporations if you're a startup, you've worked in a corporation in many cases. What are the friction points? What do you need to take away to make things work better? I didn't get them all. It's a small slide.
We found that it's better when we get venture support and the business unit support.
So that's interesting. So if a corporation has a venture fund, don't assume that it works well with the lines of business. So you may need to educate them about, if you want to do a pilot first, then invest, or invest, then pilot, you got to work that stuff out. Any other suggestions? Any other experiences? Things that didn't work? Okay, I'll just move on then. Okay, let's talk about events. Those work too. Again, events do work, but they're the beginning of something. So with the events, usually when we think about it, we're not thinking about, oh, we're going to bring customers in. But you can do stuff like that. You can do, ever heard of a reverse pitch? You know what a reverse pitch is? You're nodding, you want to?
It's where a customer presents a pain point versus the.
Exactly, there you go. Like, let's say you've cultivated the customers and they've come to, okay, these are the things we want to work on. Have them come up on stage in front of your startups. Works, right? You're like, oh, if my system does most of that, let me talk to them. I can maybe pursue it. So you can do things like that. Once you've educated them on how to work with it, and you've picked your industry that you want to push, you know exactly who to invite, and you can construct events that are more effective around this. Now, the trick with working with corporations that I've learned, especially when we went vertically focused at DreamIt, is you have to pick the right interaction frequency. If you're not in front of them consistently, they forget about you. If you're too in front of them, they get annoyed because they have work to do. So I've found at DreamIt, if we did it twice a year, that was okay. I think about once a quarter is great. Because once you have it once a quarter, you're on their regular calendar. They know there's going to be another event coming up. Now, your mileage will vary. Some companies are like, I can't do that. I'm just going to come to every other one. But think about the frequency from the perspective of your customer, who this may not be their full-time job. How do you get them to always reserve that time for you on a regular basis? So you really turn this into not just an event here, but a repeatable, sustainable process between events. If you induct another startup or two into whatever program you're running, how do you put them in the system? How do you match them up with the right customers? Right? You don't just sit there and like, oh, maybe these three. How do you make that into a process? This is what I mean about getting more out of an event than just having a lot of people in the room, and then maybe some things happen and maybe they don't. And the one piece of advice I'm going to give you that often helps solidify it is don't think about who you're inviting. Think about how you're making those connections happen. Everything else will flow from there. Any success stories, building startup ecosystems with customers, making these introductions, and maybe somebody in biz dev can talk about what works and doesn't work? No? Okay. Come to me later if you didn't want to tell me now. Okay, this is something I've never seen happen. I've tried pushing it in a couple of places. I still think it's brilliant, but I might be a little biased. So we talked about budget being a roadblock. I don't have budget right now. The biggest place this was, K-12 school systems. When I did EdTech, if you missed the annual budgeting cycle, you're out of luck for a year. Anyone know, if you're a startup, anyone know kind of how many months of runway you typically get when you raise a round? You can yell it out. 18 to 24 months. What if you're an EdTech startup and you miss the budget cycle? Yeah, that's your entire runway. You're out of luck. So I don't have budget. Could be an excuse or could be a real reason they don't want to do it. And it's a real problem. Now, what if we flip the script? What if we flip the script and we created, you probably don't want to call it a slush fund, but that's what it is. Created a fund, and instead of tax incentives or instead of co-working space, you get, as a corporation, a $10,000 grant to be used to pilot with a startup. Now, think about what happens. So number one, the mentality changes. It's not, I don't have the money, how am I going to get the money and talk to my boss to find it? It's, if I don't take this money, someone else gets it. Right? So you've changed it from scarcity to FOMO. That's number one. Number two, the startup gets to book that as revenue. And when you have revenue, what does that make it easier to do? Money, exactly. I got customers now. And if you structure it just right, it's like, oh, you can use the $10,000. It's only for the startups on the approved list. We'll figure out how that happens. It could be a list of like the VCs that are in this forum. If there could be portfolio companies, it could be other reasons to do it. Short form, it's not like I have to spend, 20 pages to apply and it's going to take me 3 months to happen. It's like a short form application, only good for the initial pilot. Right? And if you're smart, you can structure the engagement with the startup evergreen unless canceled. Right? So this is what we're charging. The first $10,000 is paid for out of the fund. It'll auto renew and you guys will start paying me directly after that period is over unless you call to cancel. Right? So it's a glide path. Like if you're already creating value, then the customer has to come back and say, you're creating a lot of value, but we're not paying for it. Well, that doesn't usually happen. They will say, like, they may haggle over what the exact price is, but if it plays it right, that becomes recurring revenue over time. Has anyone ever seen this? I haven't.
There are advanced innovative manufacturing accelerators that are funded by the DoD. AIM Photonics is one of them that has a huge impact here. BioMade is another one.
Interesting, and that's a grant to the, how does the grant part work?
So they're large institutes that are set up, funded by DoD. They bring together all the stakeholders and customers of an industry, and every year they have a few open grants that fund basically pilot projects for startups that will benefit the majority.
And they write the check to the customer, and the customer writes the check to the, okay, very cool. I mean, I know about S4s. I've got a couple of dual-use startups in my portfolio, but I've never seen that, so that's really cool. I want to get more detail about that later. Has anyone else seen anything like this? No? Any thoughts? If you don't think it's going to work, yell it out now, because otherwise people are like, oh, maybe we should try that. No?
The little bend on it is the 10,000 one time for a corporation, but by business.
Yeah, you can play around with it, whether it's, it's not $10,000 for all of GE. It's something, I actually meant it one time per startup, right? So if you're piloting with me and you're a division of GE, like I only get to go to that well once. Now maybe GE is such a large enough corporation that you might say like I can part with you for $10,000 and then their other unit I'm doing something else maybe. Nuances, but you get the idea.
Kind of related is your point around cutting down the sales, with long sales cycles, short funding cycles, creates a real challenge. I think part of this, what you're saying is, you cut down some of the sales cycle because you're smoothing for the customer how long it takes for them to get the funding piece of it. Have you ever seen anything happen with the other part of it being kind of getting like, in the procurement part, but also for like technologies that have some type of information security or other kind of stakeholders they have to jump through?
Yeah, so the regulatory stuff is really, really hard. It's really, really hard. Tempted to stop there, but I won't. Okay, it's really, really hard. You might want to come up, if it's I'm worried about my secret sauce as a corporation getting out there, they have to get comfortable. There's not that much. There's actually a startup in Dream It's Secure Tech program that actually made that process of chasing down all those approvals a little easier. Blanking on the name right now, maybe you end up just hiring them and rolling it out. If it's more of a regulatory cover your butt, right? Now listen, we have to, GovTech, right? GovTech, we have to have 3 bids, right? Or if we don't have 3 bids, we have to go figure out if we can do this as a sole source, right? That's kind of a problem. Maybe you can create a fast track there and get around it. I'm almost done. I think, the next part is I'm opening it up. Like, what haven't I said that I should be thinking about, or that you've seen work, or that you have seen not work, and then we can just not do it again? Okay. Why don't we end with that? Think about it. Where are we going next, Shelby? Awesome. Let's think about this over beer. Come over, let's keep the conversation going. Thanks for having me.